Well, since Rio 1992, at least, we believe because of that event, there has been more interest in sustainability than before that event. For some of us, however, we have also observed that in fact, particularly on climate change, there has not been as much action as we had hoped. We know emissions have increased, in fact, more rapidly since that time. So for sure, there is quite a bit of disappointment on that track. But in some countries, again, in some countries, not many, there has been quite a bit at the national level interest in issues of biodiversity, in issues of, for example, industrial pollution. Some countries have taken it more seriously nationally. But at the global level, we had hoped that by now there will be consensus on many issues, particularly climate change. I mean, we've been negotiating since that time, and still we don't have the grand deal that we had hoped for. So there is some disappointment, and indeed, in fact, we've not seen much alignment between the politics and the financing. That was the hope that that event would have galvanized real political will and action and linked that up with finance for action on the ground. So yes, there has been some disappointment. During that 20-year period, there has been some finger pointing as to who is more responsible for problems, e.g. climate change, who is more responsible than others. But we think the discussions have evolved. We recognize now that finger pointing as to who caused the most damage has not been helpful. So more and more, there are various avenues where there are dialogues now based on the Bali Plan of Action, focusing on those 4 pillars of mitigation, adaptation, technology, and finance. The dialogue has improved, but again, what has been missing is the real interest of countries to focus on taking more action for the global, that is for the global good. With the financial crisis also now since 2007, it's been very difficult to get political will to agree on some major global goals, environmental goals or sustainability goals, because of national crises that some countries have. There is fear that if they make commitments, their economies will even slow down more. And also the crisis has prevented governments from thinking long term. Everybody is more concerned about short term. Worst case, in fact, they are concerned about the next soundbite on television that in the evening news that day. Now, if you're concerned about what happens in 2 hours on the evening news, you will not take action on what we need to do in 5, 10, or 20 years. You need those political initiatives, you also need awareness on some specific issues in sustainable development. When I take the energy agenda, which I'm helping to lead, I can tell you that while people understand that they need electricity, we've not seen it mainstreamed enough into the development discourse until we put it on the agenda. A few years ago, in fact, about 1.5 years ago, we wanted some paragraphs included in a major political document that was looking at the Millennium Development Goals. We couldn't get those paragraphs in. The politics would not allow it. However, we got mentions here and there about the importance of energy. So you and I would say, wait a minute, people still don't recognize how crucial energy access is for Millennium Development Goals. Dr. Pachauri has been talking about that since 5 years ago, that energy access is the missing Millennium Development Goal. But still, even to get it in a document was not easy because the politics was not well aligned. So I believe you still need awareness. Second, some of what we need to do for sustainable development requires changing individual habits, meaning habits of you and myself, how we use electricity, what we do with those appliances at the house. So that is why we don't want to underplay the importance of awareness, for that matter, communications in general. How do we get global, how do we get leaders, whether in business or in particular in parliaments, to look at sustainability and say, fine, I have to take local action, but I still have to contribute to global action. That is not easy. I know from some heads of states, I know from some ministers, I mean, they believe what we're saying about some of the global issues. But locally, they still need to create jobs. They also have to sell to their own local constituents why it makes sense to make concessions that may have short-term negative impacts on the economy, but has even better, longer-term benefits for the global commons. They have to sell it locally. So communications or awareness, let's call it communications. We still need to communicate more, and we need to communicate better. Again, on communication, remember we also tried the fear tactic. We told people what will happen with the global disaster if they don't do some things. I mean, what do you call it? The inconvenient truth was told. Well, it didn't change policy in some major economies. Some governments, some parliaments still blocked energy policy in their countries because they felt those energy policies would have helped the global commons, not their own national interest. So even the communication, my point here is the fear narrative did not work. Maybe we need to talk about the benefits and transformative narrative now. The green growth opportunities that are there, the jobs, the technology transfer, and so on. So you see, when I say awareness yesterday, I also meant that the media has a role in changing the narrative on sustainability, not just the negative consequences, but also the benefits that could arise from global action. African countries can learn a lot from India. That was the basis of my discussions with your ministers and government officials yesterday and today. You have made successes in a number of areas that we need to expose African countries to. When I look at some of what you've done in waste to energy projects, using rice husk to generate power through gasification. I have seen also what you've done in Coimbatore, you know, through some work done in your research centers, burning coconut shells through a gasifier, producing charcoal, coal that can be used for water filtration, but also generating power. These things we've not done yet. I've seen some of your technologies on methanization, generating methane for cooking in households. Some of what your barefoot engineers, women, are doing. So, and these are happening now. Your government is giving a lot of attention to transfer of knowledge and technology from India to African countries and helping them out. I see a lot of that, which is also backed by other investments. So there's a lot we can learn from each other. There's a lot we need from each other. But my point is that with the similarities we have in terms of problems, you are in many cases light years ahead of us. A number of our countries in sub-Saharan Africa, that is. There's no doubt that there is a big difference between the support given to traditional energy sources compared to what you call in India alternative or new and renewable energy. The estimates we have from the International Energy Agency are we have about $312 billion in subsidies in 2009 to traditional fossil fuels. By 2011, that was 400 billion. From 312 billion to 400 billion. That's a huge jump. What we are saying is let's level the playing field. If we're going to support fossil technologies so much, can we support alternative energy as well? Possibly same level, or at least we begin to draw down some of those subsidies where it is feasible. Because remember, some of the subsidies are meant to provide access for the poor to energy. So for example, in African countries, I would not remove subsidies from kerosene. Kerosene is the poor man's energy for lighting and cooking. But I would perhaps remove some subsidies for automobiles for the middle class. But even that has to be calibrated very carefully how you do it. And those funds can be used to support communities and others to have access to renewable energy technologies. That removing those subsidies and supporting R&D in the case of R&D to lower the cost of renewable energy technologies. So yes, we need to level the playing field a little bit and support alternative energy solutions as much as we have done over almost 100 years supporting fossil technologies. But also it's not only that. You can use, we're saying also you can redeploy some of those subsidies now to decarbonize even fossil technologies, because we will be dependent on those technologies even up to 2050. But can we decarbonize them, reduce the carbon content of those? And you see new technologies like carbon capture and storage. Also related to subsidies is the whole pricing issue. The subsidies make the price of fossil much lower than they should be. Meaning what? We're not costing the environmental impact. We're not imposing a carbon tax. And in the case of Norway, that was done very cleverly 15 years ago. A carbon tax was introduced. It was controversial in their country, but they're used to it now, and it's never slowed their growth. But with that resource from the carbon tax, they've been able to finance innovative technologies such as carbon capture and storage and others. And their industries have been encouraged to innovate. So in essence, we're saying, let's have the correct pricing of fossil technologies, but not at the expense of the poor. Well, generally I say to young people, because I do have the opportunity to address young audiences a lot in universities and other places, I say they should be fully engaged in this, because it's about what we call intergenerational equity. If we mess up the world now and leave you also with big debts, not only financial, but also environmental debt, your future will not be as enjoyable as ours. So you have to engage. I put it in that sense, in those terms, to the young population, that sustainability is about your future. I mean, old folks like me will be gone by then, all these 2050 issues. But you have an interest and a stake to play here, that you don't want us passing on environmental debt to you, including financial burdens. So you must engage. At the same time, for us, we have to create jobs for you. And so this is why you see some governments are pushing the growth and therefore pushing even more use of energy and continuing the old paradigm of development. It's a difficult trade-off, but perhaps governments may have more confidence if young people are also engaged in finding the solutions for their future. Because the governments are also scared. If they don't create the jobs fast enough, the college kids, would be on the streets tomorrow morning demanding more. My last comment is, I learned something recently from a marketer in Asia. This individual has her net worth is about $500 million. So she knows what she's talking about. She says the new force in global governance is TGIF. Not thank God it's Friday, but Twitter, Google, Internet, Facebook generation. You guys have proven in 2011 you're more powerful than we ever thought you were, because you have information. That information can help you also mobilize on sustainable development. So that's a new force. Youth are engaged. It's still disorganized for now, but you know something? They've demonstrated in 2011 they can trigger quick action in some places that you never felt. Maybe you can help us with the energy revolution, because we need that energy revolution if we're not going to poison all of us with more carbon.